Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into a fascinating historical transformation today. Imagine a classical performing art evolving into a fierce, vibrant battleground of political defiance. Well, that's exactly what happened with Indian theater. We're going to unpack a rigorous academic review by Neelish Bose of Nandi Bhatkia's book, Acts of Authority, Acts of Resistance. Together, we're exploring how the stage functioned as a powerful weapon against empires, and we'll look at the complex scholarly debates that surround this whole history.
Our chronological roadmap is going to take us from the grassroots resistance of the 19th century right through to modern academic critiques. We'll explore subaltern voices, state censorship, radical anti-imperialist art, and post-independence women's theater, before wrapping up with an impartial look at how modern scholars analyze these movements today.
Section 1. Subaltern Voices on Stage. Theater as Resistance.
This era brought about a profound cultural collision. You had the rigid, highly bureaucratic structure of British colonial authority suddenly coming face-to-face with a dynamic, unpredictable expression of indigenous arts. Now, early colonial studies often loved to focus on the written novel to track cultural history. But in a society where the vast majority of the population engaged with culture through live, spoken performance, the stage was where the real political friction happened.
To truly grasp this history, we have to talk about subaltern resistance. Think of the subaltern as everyday people living completely outside the hegemonic power structure of the colony. These are folks with absolutely zero access to the halls of power, the drafting of laws, or the elite printing presses. For them, the stage wasn't just a Friday night out for entertainment. It was literally their newspaper, their platform, and their rallying cry.
And you have to remember, in colonial India, literacy rates were remarkably low. Because of this, stage performance, rather than the written novel, is what mobilized entire communities across urban centers and rural heartlands. Theater completely unsettled the comfortable elite position that the novel traditionally occupied. It was visceral, it was immediate, and most importantly, it didn't require you to know how to read to understand a profound political message.
Section 2. Protest and Colonial Censorship. The Empire Strikes Back.
So the major turning point hit in 1876. As political protest plays started absolutely sweeping through regions like Bengal, the colonial state panicked. They suddenly realized the sheer mobilizing power of the theater. Their response was pretty heavy-handed. They enacted the Dramatic Performances Censorship Act. This was explicitly designed to legally silence indigenous voices, clamping down on any performance deemed rebellious and casting this dark, intense net of state surveillance over the arts.
But what do artists do when they're silenced? They adapt. Playwrights were forced to get incredibly clever to survive. While early plays like Mill Darpin were direct, in-your-face political confrontations, later writers had to seek out safe havens. They started using Shakespeare and religious myths to camouflage their critiques. By layering anti-colonial sentiments right beneath the surface of famous tragedies or ancient allegories, they kept the resistance alive right under the watchful eyes of state censors. This whole push and pull between censorship and expression evolved incredibly fast. Following that initial legal crackdown in 1876, the theater entered a long period of subversive adaptation. And that simmering energy eventually boiled over into the highly organized radical theater associations of the 1940s, right on the cusp of India's independence in 1947.
Section 3. The IPTA and Anti-Imperialism. Radical Performance Art.
Right in the 1940s, the Indian People's Theater Association, or IPTA, emerged as this massive vehicle for radical performance. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about fighting foreign imperialism. It was a deeply internal look at domestic class struggles and socioeconomic inequities. They ingeniously took European theatrical theories and altered them, blending them seamlessly with the rich cultural traditions of the local working-class populations they were performing for. Playwrights like Utpal Dutt used plays such as Mahavidroha to actively rewrite imperial narratives. You see, for decades, the 1857 rebellion had been documented by colonizers dismissively as just a mere mutiny. Dutt's theatrical work fiercely disrupted that colonialist rendering. By using the stage to reclaim that specific historic event as a monumental act of local resistance, theater actually became a way to seize back the historical narrative itself.
Section 4. Women's Street Theater Movements. Beyond the Patriarchal Frame.
Once independence was won, the theater's focus shifted dramatically. For a long, long time, theatrical representations of women had been resolutely patriarchal. But post-independence theater finally broke free from those restrictive molds. While earlier periods featured male playwrights focusing heavily on state authority, this new era pushed way beyond that male-dominated framework to address the completely unexamined private sphere.
Women artists started turning public spaces into immediate, uncompromising platforms for grassroots activism. They were boldly tackling issues that have been swept under the rug for generations: domesticity, abuse, sexuality, and the demand for true gender justice. By moving the theater out of formal buildings and literally into the streets, these performances forced a changing society to confront the uncomfortable realities of everyday life.
Section 5, Academic Critiques and Legacy. Reading between the lines.
Now, modern scholars like Nilesh Bose urge us to take a step back, look past the romanticized narratives, and examine the historical data neutrally. As Bose points out, the distance between anti-colonialisms and nationalisms is a very complex terrain. Essentially, simply labeling 19th century protest plays as inherently nationalist is a massive oversimplification of a highly fragmented political reality. The main scholarly critique highlights this crucial gap in the analysis. We have to carefully separate simple anti-colonial sentiment from the actual complicated development of a unified national identity. Does hating the empire automatically mean you share a unified vision for a new nation? Bose argues that assuming these plays inherently developed nationalist thought skips right over the heavily debated reality of how nationalism actually formed in South Asia. Furthermore, there is what scholars call the Neil Darpan problem. Current analyses of famous protest plays often fail to fully explain the deep mechanical relationship between the law and the theater. Yes, the plays weren't loyalist, but scholars sometimes fail to clearly articulate how surviving those very censorship laws actually forced playwrights to invent entirely new theoretical frameworks for drama. And this brings us to another major academic pitfall: the danger of homogenization. Bose warns against lumping all diverse, marginalized groups into one simplified category of just the people. When historians uncritically applaud theater groups for reaching the masses, they really risk erasing the massive, complex differences in class, caste, religion, and geography that truly defined these subaltern communities. So even the legendary IPTA requires a bit of objective scrutiny here. While their reach was undeniably vast, assessing their work against European standards of high realism leaves some critical questions totally unanswered. Bose notes that if we claim the IPTA altered European theories for local traditions, we need to precisely define what makes a form European or Indian, rather than just accepting a clean, uncompromised narrative of resistance. But despite all these valid academic complexities and ongoing debates, one thing is certain: Indian theater is far more than mere entertainment. It is an enduring, living document of identity. It chronicles the fierce resistance against imperialism, it evolved to fight socioeconomic inequality, and it continues to champion gender justice today. It's a dynamic art form that is constantly reinventing itself. And that's exactly why compilations of this archival material are so vital for scholars today. Preserving this data in databases allows us to continually revisit, debate, and really refine our understanding of how live performances and cultural encounters actively shaped both colonial and post-colonial societies. I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. Knowing how the stage served as a vital weapon against 19th century empires, how do modern performance spaces in your own community continue to act as a mirror and a challenge to the powers of today? Because as we've seen in this explainer, art is never just art when it's performed under the shadow of authority. Keep questioning the narrative, and thank you so much for joining me.